Was this the most emotionally charged race weekend of the year? Without a shadow of a doubt. um, what a weekend. And there is so much to talk about. So, saddle up. This is the fuel. What is happening, ladies and germs? This is the PackerMan, and welcome to this week's edition of The Fuel. This week we're going to be reviewing the 2019 Bass Pro Shops NRA night race at Bristol and the ABC Supply 500 at Pocono. Of course, Bristol was night race at Bristol for the Cup Series, and of course the ABC Supply 500 at Pocono for the IndyCar Series. What a weekend. I've been watching motorsports for damn near close to 25 years now. It is not very often that we see such an emotionally charged weekend like we saw this week, for a number of different reasons. And the storylines coming out of this weekend are just, I literally had to make a list of all the stuff to talk about, because there is so freaking much to go over this week. And there's also a lot to talk about from the Bristol race, from the ABC Supply 500, and of course the championship battle that's going on there. What a crazy weekend. One of the craziest weekends in motorsports that I can recall in recent memory. And considering how much we have to talk about this week, this is probably going to be the longest video of the year for me so far, because between the news of the week that I'm going to be talking about, and there's so much to talk about there, so much to talk about from the Bristol night race, the ABC Supply 500 at Pocono. I might need to get myself a drink or two just to keep my throat from going out, because so much to talk about, so much emotion coming out of this, and we're going to be getting into all of it. So I would probably sit back, relax, pause the video, get some popcorn, maybe a cold beverage, because I have a feeling this is going to be one long ass video, because like I said, so much to talk about and so many different news stories coming out of this weekend. So let's go ahead and get into it, starting of course with the news of the week. Alright, so news of the week here in motorsports. Oh, and one last thing before we get started. Because of how I'm anticipating how long this video is going to be, one thing I will do is I'll put timestamps down in the description box below, so you can skip to whatever part you want to watch at your discretion. Basically of news of the week, when I do the Bristol review and the IndyCar review and all that good stuff. So if there's certain things that you want to skip to, then I'll put those down in the description box below. But with that out of the way, let's go ahead and get into the news of the week. Without a doubt, the biggest news of the weekend, my favorite driver, back when he was driving, Dale Earnhardt Jr., and his family were involved in a plane crash on Thursday en route to the Bristol Motor Speedway. Needless to say, as a longtime fan of Junior's, when I saw this come across my Twitter feed, it scared the living hell out of me because this had vibes, you know, back to, when we've lost drivers due to plane crashes. I mean, Curtis Turner in 1970 comes to mind. Alan Kowicki and Davey Allison in 93 getting killed in separate aircraft accidents. Of course, the Hendrick tragedy in 2004 during Martinsville weekend. I mean, the NASCAR family has certainly lost its fair share of drivers, team members, and the like due to plane crashes over the years. And but to lose one of its most popular drivers of all time, boy, that would have been horribly depressing for a lot of us, myself included. 1 second here. So, report on here says Dale Earnhardt Jr. and his family are recovering after Thursday's shocking plane crash at a Tennessee airport. The former NASCAR driver, his wife Amy, and 1-year-old daughter Isla were on board, along with 2 pilots and the Earnhardt's family dog, when the plane bounced multiple times during landing, crashed into a fence, and burst into flames near a highway. And according to what I heard, not everybody was out of the plane when it caught fire. So very fortunate that they were able to get out of there before the plane was completely engulfed. And there was footage of the crash, which investigators have obtained, and is consistent with all interviews on board, and are trying to figure out what went wrong. And apparently everybody is okay. A big concern was the fact that the plane bounced up and down a couple of times, so that was a major concern because Junior has had a history of concussions, so he's a lot more vulnerable to, trauma to the head than some people are, due to the fact that he's had recent concussions. So that was certainly a big concern. When he was walking away from the plane, he actually ended up collapsing in the field. I don't know if it was, due to like the adrenaline just finally rushing away from him, and he just got weak in the knees or what. But from what we've heard, everybody is okay, which is a huge relief coming from someone who has been a long time Junior fan. This without a doubt scared the living hell out of me. But it is great to see that he, his wife, and his daughter are all okay, because this could have been a lot worse than it was. Especially when you look at, what's left of the plane. I mean, there's literally almost nothing left of it. And thinking about what would have happened is it's a scary thing to think about. National Transportation Safety Board investigator Ralph Hicks, in a news conference, basically said the airplane basically bounced at least twice before coming down hard on the right main landing gear. You can actually see the right main landing gear collapsing on the video that someone was able to take. The airplane continued down the runway off to the end, through a fence, and came to a stop behind the airport on Highway 91, which is also pretty fortunate that there was no cars that were involved in it either, because apparently that's a high traffic highway. So very fortunate that no one else was injured in this as well, because there was a very real possibility that cars could have gotten struck by the plane as well. So yeah, and there were a lot of drivers that expressed their concerns about it, obviously, and it's just surreal to think about it. And this type of thing can happen to anyone. And man, it nearly took the life of one of NASCAR's most popular drivers. I mean, say what you want about his career. He's definitely had his ups and downs throughout his career, but there's no denying the impact he's had on NASCAR, and that would have been one of the biggest tragedies in recent memory, if the worst would have happened. So thankful that Junior and his family were able to get out unharmed, because that was, I can't imagine how scary that must have been for them, especially with, you know, especially considering that Earnhardt's wife and child were on board with him, along with the family dog. I mean, basically his family was on board the plane with him. And, you know, for them to go through what they went through. Of course, Isla's not going to know any better because she's only a year old, so she's probably not going to remember this whatsoever, but she'll probably be hearing tales from her parents about this, and man, just thankful that Junior and his family are okay after this. And he decided to take this week off from commentary due to this incident, in which I don't really blame him. And the Cup Series has next week off as well, so he'll have a couple weeks to kind of recuperate and kind of relax after this, because I can't imagine what that must have been like. So, but glad that him and his family are okay after that, because that was a scary incident. Let's get into some slightly lighter news, although some of this news is not exactly sterling, admittedly. Next up, Bailey Curry, who is driving for Rick Ware Racing here in 2019, has been suspended indefinitely by NASCAR for violating NASCAR's substance abuse policy. He released a statement that basically says, this weekend, and I'm going to have it on screen here as well, this weekend at Bristol Motor Speedway, NASCAR informed me that I failed a random drug test administered last week. I spoke with NASCAR's doctor, where he explained that I had DMA, I think he corrected it, I think he said it was DMMA, which is 2-amino-5-methylhexane in my system. I take a pre-workout supplement, Juggernaut Irate, and this ingredient is indeed in the supplement. I was obviously not aware that I was violating NASCAR's substance abuse policy. I have immediately asked NASCAR to enter me into the Road to Recovery program, where I will gain more knowledge about such banned supplements, and I will fully cooperate with NASCAR's direction and advice. I have worked very hard for a lifetime to reach this level, and I am eternally grateful to be afforded the privilege to compete in the sport that I love. I want to publicly apologize to my owners, Rick and Lisa Ware, all the employees of Rick Ware Racing, my sponsors, NASCAR, and most importantly, the fans. My lack of knowledge is no excuse for this to happen. I will expediently complete the process, and I will strive to have my suspension lifted as soon as possible. A couple things to come out of this. Now, you may be wondering why NASCAR is so strict when it comes to violating their substance abuse policy. It's because of the simple fact that these drivers are piloting 3,400-pound race cars with 550 horsepower, and with unrestricted motors, even at 550 horsepower, these cars can easily exceed 200 miles an hour. Do you want someone who's impaired under the influence of a substance to be wielding one of these race cars? Which, I mean, it basically turns it into like a deadly weapon if, you know, and put into the wrong hands. You know what I mean? So NASCAR takes the substance abuse policy very seriously for that very reason. Secondly, while Bailey Curry is certainly on a team that is, you know, about as backmarker as it can be, at the very least, he's acknowledged that, you know, he made a mistake. He's taken ownership of it, and he is going to get into the Road to Recovery program and try to do a better job at avoiding violating the policy again in the future. So at the very least, he's taking ownership of it, and he's doing whatever's necessary to get back into the sport. So I will give him credit for that, for taking ownership of it. But that's basically the reason why NASCAR is so stringent with it, because you don't want someone who's under the influence of a substance, especially if it affects their, it affects their perception and everything else, to be wielding a 3,400-pound race car. That would be very bad news, and it would be a very bad look for NASCAR. Next bit of crazy news to come out of this. Apparently, officials at Bristol Motor Speedway decided to quote-unquote grind the upper groove with the tire dragon without notifying the teams or NASCAR. Now, evidently, this didn't really cause that much of an issue, considering how good the racing was this weekend across all 3 races. But initially, when drivers and teams were coming into Bristol this weekend, they were kind of frustrated about not being told beforehand. Bob Pockris reported on Twitter, he said, drivers frustrated they not told about track upper groove being ground or polished. Kyle Busch said SMI does whatever it wants. SMI says the only thing they did was scrape the rubber off the top groove. Told me to think like a buffing machine and water. They did it in the last week. So obviously there was some sort of communications breakdown between NASCAR, the teams, and Speedway Motorsports Incorporated, who owns Bristol Motor Speedway. So I don't know if something got lost in translation, but I can see where that can be kind of frustrating from a driver's perspective, that they were not told that the upper groove was being ground and polished to make the upper groove a little bit tougher to race on. Obviously, Bristol wants. Obviously, SMI wanted to bring the old Bristol back in some ways, which they have kind of succeeded. I mean, let's be honest here. The racing at Bristol has never been better. And I would argue that the Bristol race last night was probably the best race of the year, bar none, which we will be getting to in a little bit. But yeah, there were drivers that were frustrated about not being told, and I think that was just a communications breakdown. Something that they really need to kind of iron out a little bit. I mean, it would be nice to be told beforehand, so I can kind of see where the drivers are coming from. One second. Gotta look through my notes here. Tyler Reddick. Wow, what a day he had on Friday night. His car failed pre-race tech inspection 4 times. And because of that, his car chief was ejected from the race. And because his car failed pre-race tech 4 times, he suffers, a 10-point penalty, has to start from the rear of the field, and also has to get a drive-through penalty on top of all that. He still came back and won the race. So, I guess they managed to finally get the car through tech inspection, and from what I can tell, I mean, I've been looking on Twitter and I haven't seen anything to say otherwise. They passed post-race tech inspection, so I mean, you kind of wonder how many times they have to go through pre-race tech before they're ultimately told they can't race. But yeah, 4 times that car failed pre-race tech inspection. That is way too freaking much. I mean, I know these teams try to get every bit of advantage that they can, but I mean, when you're over the line, you're over the line, and you kind of need to back it up a little bit. Otherwise, this type of thing would happen. Now, obviously, losing the 10 points, I mean, Tyler Reddick is already in the playoff, and he won his 4th race of the year. I mean, that 10 points isn't going to mean shit. And obviously starting at the rear of the field and getting a drive-through penalty on top of that, that didn't really do shit either. So, but give credit to Tyler Reddick for fighting back through all that and ended up winning the race. So, not really much more you can say than that. Also at Bristol was the K&N East race, and there was a bit of an injury that came out of this race. At the beginning of the K&N race, Sam Mayer, who ended up going on to win the race, spun Chase Cabre right at the beginning of the race, and I think he ended up backing into the wall, which didn't look like it did a whole lot. But as the race wound on, and with about 50 laps to go, Cabre started reporting that he started feeling a progressively worsening pain in his lower back. So evidently he suffered some type of back injury. So that's not good. And after the race was over, I mean, I don't know how he managed to gut it out, basically, and finish the race. But after the race was over, he had to be carted off on a stretcher. No, I haven't seen any word on what type of injury he may have suffered in that crash, but this is one of the reasons why I said that retaliation with a race car is not a good idea, because there's the potential to hurt someone seriously, and this is a perfect example of that. I mean, it might have been, I mean, I think these two have had quite a bit of a heated rivalry in the K&N series this year. I don't know if, I didn't see the race, so I don't know if it was actually intentional on Sam Mayer's part to spin Cabre, but it ended up causing an injury, and this is one of those, and this is a perfect example of why I don't want to see retaliation with a race car. If you have a problem with another driver, settle it man to man outside the race car. Don't be using your race cars as weapons, because you could have situations like this. And a bit of good news, though. The Michigan television rating saw a pretty big increase from last year. Of course, Michigan, pretty good race. I think it had 9 pure lead changes in the race. It was 8 or 9. And the race overall was actually pretty good. A lot better than the one from June. And it obviously showed as far as the television rating is concerned, because the television rating was up 12% from last year. That's a pretty big jump, all things considered. I think the rating was like a 1.86 or something like that, whereas last year was at like around a 1.6 overall. 12% is quite the jump. So kind of continuing the trend that races have had this year, where they're seeing, after having a bit of a dip, and last year you could probably say was probably the worst year in terms of TV ratings for NASCAR, but this year they're starting to finally see that uptick once again, and the Michigan race certainly proved that. I mean, 12%, that's a pretty damn good jump. And obviously having better racing this year makes a big difference. There's only been a few races this year that have been absolute turds. Michigan and Pocono being a few of those, but their second acts ended up being better. I mean, what can you say? So, Michigan television rating up 12%. That's good shit. Silly season is in full effect. Got some news coming out of this week about a couple of drivers. Starting with Joe Gibbs Racing, we learned that Eric Jones will stay with the 20 car for at least one more year. Basically, Jones has one more year to basically straighten himself out, because with Christopher Bell coming up to the Cup Series next year, which I will talk about here in a minute, I mean, Jones better start reeling off those wins. I mean, let's be honest here. Last couple weeks, he has been running pretty damn good. He was running good at Bristol too, until he made a mistake late in the race. But we'll get to that when we get to it. But I mean, he's been reeling off top fives recently, and trying to put himself in a position to lock himself into the playoff. Which, if he has a good run 2 weeks from now at Darlington, I mean, he could lock himself into the playoff on points. So he's been running good the last couple weeks, but he still only has the one win at Daytona. So considering the fact that his 3 teammates all have 4 wins apiece, he needs to start reeling off those wins, or he's going to be the odd man out. And I like Eric Jones. You know, I want to see him succeed. He seems like a nice kid. You know, just wants to, you know, race and succeed at the highest level. You know, and I want to see him succeed because he seems like a good dude. But we've also got to keep it real. He's got to start reeling off those results. And by results, he needs to start putting up some wins. Because, I mean, when you look at his teammates, they're all putting up wins in mass. I mean, Kyle Busch with 4, Truex with 4, Hamlin now with 4. I mean, he needs to start producing because Christopher Bell is waiting in the wings. Because, let's be honest here, Christopher Bell, I think he's one of those generational talents because he has been tearing a path through NASCAR's lower tier divisions. Of course, winning the truck title. He's one of the favorites to win the Xfinity title this year. Christopher Bell is just way too talented to not bring up to the Cup Series next year. And I think he will be taking over a car that we'll be talking about here in a minute. And is also going to be it probably would have been the biggest story of the weekend were it not for the Dale Jr. thing. But Eric Jones staying with the 20 car for at least one more year. But a little bit of a surprising news coming out of the Front Row Motorsports camp. David Reagan is retiring from full-time competition. It's hard to believe that he's actually been around for 13 seasons. Has it really been that long? Damn. But he announced that he was retiring from full-time competition this week. Of course, has the 2 wins at Daytona and Talladega. And basically said that he wants to spend some more time with his family and his 2 daughters, which I fully understand. I mean, when Nico Rosberg won the Formula One World Championship a couple years ago, he immediately retired from the sport because, you know, he wanted to spend some more time with his family. And let's be honest here, when you win the Formula One World Championship, there's a ginormous freaking paycheck that comes with it. I mean, and considering that he was driving for Mercedes, I would imagine he was making just buckets of money, and he probably made more than enough to retire on and not have to work another day in his life. You know, so, and he wanted to spend time with his family, and I fully understand that, man. I mean, more power to him, and he retired on top, you know, and that's always what you love to do. You want to retire as the champion, and that's what Nico Rosberg did, and I have much respect to him for that. And David Reagan basically doing the same thing, and while his career has not really been anything noteworthy, I mean, he has stuck around for 13 seasons, and you know, that's honestly not bad, and probably got a pretty good, you know, paycheck through all those times working with Roush Fenway and then eventually with Front Row Motorsports, where he's pretty much been for the majority of his career. But yeah, David Reagan retiring after 13 years to spend more time with his family, which I wholeheartedly understand. And then, of course, the big news of the weekend. It was reported that Matt DiBenedetto will not be back with Levine Family Racing next year, which is kind of a shame considering the performance he put on at Bristol last night, which we will be getting to. It's pretty obvious that they're making room for Christopher Bell. Considering that Jones is going to be back in the 20 car next year, they had to make room for Bell at some point. And since Levine Family Racing is technically a Gibbs satellite team, much like Furniture Row Racing was, it's pretty obvious they were going to put Christopher Bell in that car. Although I heard at the beginning of the year that Levine Family Racing was thinking about expanding to 2 cars, so why didn't they do that? to make room for Matt DiBenedetto and Christopher Bell. I don't know. But, yeah, Matt DiBenedetto is a free agent next year. Problem is, where's he going to go? I mean, that's what kind of sucks about it. Is DiBenedetto is going to be a free agent next year, and considering his performance at Bristol last night, he would be a perfect driver to have for your team. The thing is, I don't know if there's any openings for him next year, because and this is why I was ragging on Roush Fenway Racing so badly a couple weeks ago. They re-signed Ricky Stenhouse Jr. to a 2-year contract extension through 2021 with no merit to it whatsoever. Yet you have Matt DiBenedetto, who's taking that 95 car, and let's be honest here, that 95 team, it's on the mid to lower tier status, but DiBenedetto, he's been taking that car to places that it hasn't been to. Kind of similar to what Chris Buescher's been doing with that 37 car. They're taking mid to lower tier equipment and giving it runs that it really shouldn't be given. They shouldn't be running as well as we've been seeing them. But DiBenedetto has been running great as of late. Look at his performances on the road courses. He finished top 10 at Sonoma, and then he got a top 5 finish legit at Watkins Glen. So it's pretty obvious that DiBenedetto can wield a race car, but as of right now, I don't see where there's any rides for him to go next year as far as top tier rides. You might be thinking, well, what if Clint Boyer gets ejected from the 14 car? Well, or Eric Almirola or Daniel Suarez. Even if one of those guys gets ejected, DiBenedetto is not getting a seat at Stewart-Haas because of a guy that's in the Xfinity Series that's been kicking ass as well, and will probably be moving up into one of those rides if they become available, and that guy's Cole Custer. And of course, Cole Custer almost won the championship last year, and he's been doing a lot better this year with 5 wins. So even if a ride becomes available at Stewart-Haas, I think Cole Custer is going to fill that spot, because it's obvious that he's going to be moving up. It's obvious that Christopher Bell is going to be moving up. So, the only ride that I see DiBenedetto getting would be that 38 car that David Reagan will be giving up at the end of the season. Now, one thing that could happen, and kind of forecasting into the future a little bit, one thing that could happen for DiBenedetto is that he could slot into the 38 car of Front Row Motorsports for 2020. But let's keep this in mind. Jimmy Johnson's contract with Hendrick Motorsports expires in 2020. And far be it for me to say, considering that his performances have really taken a dip in recent years, 2020 might be Jimmy Johnson's final full-time season in Cup. Because, his performances are starting to dip. And not to mention the fact that when he got behind the wheel of an IndyCar and basically got to drive around in one of those, it got him really interested in going IndyCar racing. So, considering that Jimmy Johnson's contract with Hendrick expires at the end of 2020, I would not put it outside the realm of possibility of Matt DiBenedetto ending up in that 48 car in 2021. So, as a DiBenedetto fan, I would not lose hope at this point. Yeah, he's losing his ride at the end of the year, which sucks ass. considering how well he performed at Bristol last night, which we will be talking about. But there's also the fact that at the moment I don't see any rides opening up. And even if a ride did open up, they're going to be filled by someone down in the lower tier series. It sucks. And there are some drivers in this series that are taking rides just simply because of the money they have. And unfortunately, that's just the way the business is right now. Because NASCAR's stuck in this unsustainable business model that was basically forged out of the booming popularity of the 90s. And now, in order to succeed, teams don't look at driver talent anymore. They just look at, can you bring in the dollar signs? Do you have money backing you? So you see all these guys with no fucking talent but all the money in the world getting these rides, and you see the guys who actually have talent, like say, a Ross Chastain or a Brett Moffitt, or guys like that are supremely talented, but because they don't have the funding backing them, they get the short end of the stick. I mean, Brett Moffitt won the truck championship last year and lost his fucking ride because no sponsorship. Like, what is that shit? Just a frustrating part of the business. But I think the Benedetto will eventually get into a top tier ride. It's just not going to be right away, unfortunately, and that's just the landscape right now. I don't foresee any top tier rides opening up for the time being. Despite William Byron not running well, I think they're going to stick with him because he has been improving somewhat. They're obviously going to stick with Bowman because he got his first career win. They're sure as hell not getting rid of Chase Elliott. But I would say 2021, we may be seeing DiBenedetto in a Hendrick Motorsports car. And I think Jimmy Johnson may retire or announce his retirement sometime next year. That would be my guess because he's in his 40s now. He's had a long, successful career, and he's going to be regarded as one of the best of all time. I mean, 83 career wins, tied for 5th all time, 2 Daytona 500s. He's won all the crown jewels on multiple occasions, 7 championships. What more is there for him to accomplish, honestly? He's a surefire Hall of Famer. There's really not much more for Jimmy Johnson to accomplish in NASCAR. And he's already expressed interest in wanting to go IndyCar racing and giving that a shot. So, don't be the least bit surprised if Johnson announces his retirement at some point, either this year or next year. And eventually DiBenedetto sliding into that spot. That's my prediction. Hopefully it comes true because based on what we saw last night, DiBenedetto deserves to be in a top tier ride. So that's my thoughts on that. But then we get back into some nasty shit. And unfortunately, part of the side effect of DiBenedetto being kicked from his ride is some of these toxic NASCAR fans who apparently started attacking Cody Ware for some weird ass reason, basically blaming him for losing DiBenedetto's ride. Like, how the fuck does Cody Ware get dragged into this? And he tweeted about it. Basically, it was a little string of tweets they did, and here's what he had to say: "People are sick. I kept my mouth shut and didn't respond to the death threats and attacks I received after Daytona." I'm assuming he's referring to the Daytona 500. Now a driver loses his ride after 2019. I'm thinking that's DiBenedetto. And people are telling me to kill myself and sending me threats. As someone who has attempted suicide, it is terrible and inhuman. That's fucked up. Okay? Here's the thing. I will be the first one to admit that there are times when I can get super pissed off at a driver, and that was certainly the case last night, and I will be ripping said driver a new one when I get to the race review. But even then, I would never, ever wish death on another driver, no matter what happens. It's just, it's stupid. It's brainless. I mean, why would you tell a driver to kill themselves or say they're better off dead? I mean, that's stupid shit. And it just makes you look like a total fucking scumbag. Apparently that's what some of these so-called fans were saying to Cody Ware after learning that Matt DiBenedetto was losing the 95 car after this year, which I don't understand. I mean, am I missing something here? I mean, how the fuck does Cody Ware have anything to do with this? I mean, would someone like to let me know? I mean, I don't get it. I mean, why is Cody Ware being attacked for all this? I mean, to me, it just makes no fucking sense. No sense whatsoever. Anyway, continuing with this little string, which I have on the screen as well. I have been in and out of mental health facilities on antidepressants and anti-anxiety medicine for years, and people think that something completely unrelated to me is worth throwing me into for no reason. NASCAR fans are absolutely the worst in all of sports, I agree. You can hate me all you want, disagree, and think that I don't belong in a ride. But I draw the line at thinking I'm better off dead. I've been down that path and wouldn't wish it on someone that I hate to their core. I absolutely agree. There are times when I have absolutely fucking despised a driver. Case in point, Kevin Harvick after Talladega, 2015. The shit that he did in that race, at the end of that race. Don't try to tell me that he didn't know what the fuck he was doing. He absolutely knew what he was doing, because if he didn't do what he did, he would never have made it to the championship four. He would have been out after that race. He knew exactly what he was doing. And that incident, coupled with NASCAR's unwillingness to do anything about it, prompted me to walk away from the motorsport that I love for 2 fucking years. For 2 years, I stopped watching NASCAR completely. And it was only after Truex won the championship in 2017, a guy that I do kind of support, that I decided to return to the fold in 2018. But despite that, I never, ever wished death upon Kevin Harvick. I despised him, and I did not want to see him win another race ever again. But it is not worth wishing death on someone. It is not. It just makes you look preachy and boneheaded when you do that type of shit. Not to mention, it makes you look like the scum of the earth. And it honestly brings your humanity into question. I mean, are you even still human at that point? And I will be the first one to admit, there are times when I can get really pissed off at a driver, like I said, and say, fuck that guy. But at the same time, I'm not going to tell them that they're better off dead, because that's just fucking stupid. And the last tweet he did was, I'm not ashamed of what I've gone through, and I have taken the beatings for what I deserve for my actions in the past. But for someone that still struggles with the will to get out of the bed in the morning, it is incomprehensible to me that I'm better off dead because someone lost a ride. This is yet another reason I don't like associating with this fan base. I mean, this type of shit is just unacceptable. I mean, it's one thing to not like a certain driver, but wishing death on someone, especially when he has absolutely nothing. I mean, that's what blows my fucking mind. It makes absolutely no fucking sense whatsoever. What does Cody Ware have to do with Matt DiBenedetto losing his ride? I don't get it. I absolutely don't get it. And this is why I said I don't like associating with this fan base. It is the most toxic fan base in all sports, like he said. And I've been saying that for years. And it's absolutely the truth. I mean, granted, I can get pissed off at drivers for what they do sometimes, but I would never stoop to this level. This is just stupid shit right here. And this is something that should absolutely not be fucking tolerated. Period. I mean, yeah, he was driving for a team that is pretty well trash, but going after him because DiBenedetto loses his ride, something that Cody Ware had nothing to do with. I mean, it's ridiculous. And this type of shit should not be accepted in any form. And it honestly makes NASCAR and, followers of NASCAR look like total dog shit. And it's ridiculous and it needs to fucking stop. Period. And honestly, these toxic fans were basically the front-running contender for Dumbass of the Week this week. A lot of contenders for that award this week. But something happened in the race last night that, well, swapped it over to someone else. And some of y'all may know who I'm talking about. But we'll get to that when we get to it. Holy shitballs. And that's your news of the week. Like I said, lots and lots to talk about. And we haven't even gotten to the goddamn review yet. But now that all the news stories are out of the way, we can finally get to the race review itself. Going to go in order of appearance once again this week. First up, the 2019 Bass Pro Shops NRA Night Race. Let's get into it. Alright, so here we go. The 2019 Bass Pro Shops NRA Night Race at Bristol. Needless to say, this is a race that's always circled on the calendar for me because Bristol is fucking awesome. I've been there in person on a couple of different occasions, and I've enjoyed it each and every time. The racing there has been pretty freaking fantastic the last couple of years, so at some point I would like to go back to Bristol and see it live because the racing is just phenomenal. And last night was one of the best Bristol races I've seen in quite some time. And I would argue it was the best race of the year, despite some things that happened near the end of it, which we are going to be getting into all that. Holy crap. So, stages 1 and 2 were 125 laps, stage 3 250 laps. Makes sense? So, buckle up. This is going to be one hell of a ride. So, Denny Hamlin starts from the pole, and boy, the shit he had to go through in this race, despite starting from the pole. So Hamlin leads out on lap 1 after a good clean start. Good clean start by everybody. Larson, who had a good car early on, was already hounding Hamlin for the race lead. It only took like 14 laps for Hamlin to start catching lap traffic because lots of back markers. And this is when the flood of lead changes started to come in. We had 23 total lead changes in this race. I'll leave the number of pure lead changes out for now to kind of keep things in suspense, but I'm going to tell you right now, I think it was the second or third most of the year in pure lead changes. But this is not a restrictor plate race, so it's definitely the most for a non-restrictor plate race this year. I'll tell you that much. Lots of competitive racing in this race last night. Our first pure lead change came on lap 16 when Kyle Larson got around Denny Hamlin. Truex was right behind the both of them, and he was kind of watching all this go on. Denny and Kyle traded the lead back and forth a couple of times. Hamlin got back by for the lead on lap 24. Kyle Larson got back by him on lap 39, and then Hamlin got back by him. Before that, Kyle Larson with the third pure lead change. Hamlin got stuck behind Michael McDowell, and basically Kyle Larson used him as a pick to allow him to take the lead. But then Hamlin got the lead back, so not even 50 laps in, and we're already up to 4 pure lead changes in this race. It's like, geez, I think we're in for a good one. Truex challenges Larson for second. Matt DiBenedetto up to fourth past Kurt Busch. I mean, he had a good car pretty much all weekend long. It was we saw it in practice. Qualified 7th, but it was pretty obvious that 95 car was definitely a car to watch, and that turned out to be the case. Joey Logano has to make an emergency pit stop for tires. Apparently he had a cut tire, and that was just the beginning of his problems in this race. Johnson and Kyle Busch in danger of being lapped by Hamlin early in the race, so that was a bit of a surprise, at least on the Kyle Busch side of things, considering he's an 8-time winner at Bristol. Larson starts closing back in on Hamlin for the lead, but then we get our first caution on lap 79. Austin Dillon blows a right front tire, which actually happened quite a bit in this race. Collects Jimmy Johnson. And the leader, Denny Hamlin, also received some right side damage when Johnson bounced off the wall and into him. And that was just the first of Hamlin's troubles tonight, or in this race. Everyone on the lead lap comes in for service. Larson wins the race off pit road. Hamlin loses a bit of spots due to having to repair the right side damage, obviously. So Larson leads on the restart. Matt DiBenedetto makes it up to third on the restart, so great run for him. A lot of the typical front runners struggling here at the beginning of this race. Truex gets back by DiBenedetto for third. Truex had a good car in this race as well. Then Chase Elliott starts putting major pressure on Larson with 4 laps to go in stage 1. Harvick gets by DiBenedetto for fourth. And then with 2 laps to go, Elliott forces 3 wide with a lap car of Austin Dillon. I believe it was Austin Dillon. And nearly gets by Larson for the race lead. I was hoping he would have gotten it at the line there for a pure lead change, but didn't quite get there. Larson was able to power back by on the outside and was barely able to hold Chase at bay to win stage number 1. So at this point, this race was officially awesome sauce. And I was like, are we going to see more of this? Answer to that is yeah. So a lot of cars come in for service, and Chase Elliott wins the race off pit road. So I think pretty much everybody on the lead lap came in right here. So now we get to stage number 2. Chase Elliott leads the start of stage 2. Harvick goes by Larson for second on the restart. Ryan Blaney, who also had a good car in this race, goes by Larson momentarily, but gets loose in turn 4 and drops back a bit. But he does eventually get by Larson for the 3rd position. Truex also goes by the 42 for 4th. Truex uses the 51 car as a pick to pass Blaney for the 3rd position. Then we had our 5th pure lead change on lap 164 when Kevin Harvick passed Elliott for the lead on the outside. Truex gets by Elliott for 2nd. And this is when Denny Hamlin reports a possible loose wheel on lap 182. The first of 2 loose wheels that he had in this race. He makes an emergency stop on lap 188, and then right afterwards, the second caution came out on lap 189. Eric Almirola comes across the nose of the 54 of J.J. Yeley and slides up into the wall. And of course, this caution completely burns Hamlin, who had just pitted to get the loose wheel repaired, and that trapped him laps down. But we hadn't even gotten to the halfway point yet, so there was still time for him to come back and try to win this race. Everyone on the lead lap comes in for service, and Truex wins the race off pit road this time. So Truex leads on the restart. Larson moves back up to 2nd, and Blaney up to 3rd. It was at this point we kind of realized that the bottom lane on the restarts was not the way to go. It seemed like they just could not get a launch on the bottom on the restarts. The top lane definitely seemed to be the preferred groove. Blaney goes by Larson for the 2nd position, but Truex is 1 1/4 seconds in front at this point. Then we get our 3rd caution on lap 214. When Almirola spins in turn 2 on his own accord this time. I think it was mainly due to the damage that he received. And Kyle Busch, who was a lap down at this point, gets the free pass. So he's back on the lead lap. So it's like, uh-oh. Truex leads on the restart. Kurt Busch goes to the high line and gets all the way up to 3rd. That was a pretty cool move. Then Kurt gets by Blaney on the high lane up to 2nd. The 52 of Kyle Weatherman almost comes down on Blaney, and makes heavy contact with Blaney's right front. And at this point, it's like, are you a fucking idiot? See, this is why I get so irritated with back markers, especially those as slow as the fucking Rick Ware cars. I mean, they're just moving roadblocks. I mean, I understand that they're out there, trying to, make money and, all this shit and keep their operation afloat, but maybe hire some drivers that have some fucking awareness out there. That's ridiculous. There were a couple of times this weekend where lap cars were a fucking nuisance. And there's one in particular that we're going to be talking about here in a little bit that really got on my fucking nerves. And I can't wait to get to that so I can tear him apart. We got our 4th caution on lap 244. Clint Bowyer comes across the nose of the 27 of Quinn Hoff. And it's like, these lap cars, they need to get the fuck out of the way. Especially the slower ones. Moving chicanes. A lot of cars come in for service. There were a couple that stayed out, including Kurt Busch. He leads on the restart with 2 laps to go. And he ends up winning stage number 2. Before this restarts, Kevin Harvick actually has transmission issues. They let the car down, he popped the clutch, and the transmission broke. And that was the end of Kevin Harvick's day. And he had one of the best cars, and he ended up with a last place finish, which doesn't really matter because he's already locked into the playoff anyway, because he's won twice. He won at New Hampshire, and then he won at Michigan last week. So, I mean, this doesn't really affect him all that much. And let's be honest here, that Ford team is really starting to come into its own. So even though it had a mechanical problem last night, they were running good when the mechanical problem happened. So I think if they get those mechanical gremlins ironed out, the Ford teams are going to be tough to beat in the playoff, I think. Of course, they always are, but they will be once again this year. So now we get to stage number 3. Kyle Busch stays out and leads the start of stage 3. And at this point, it's like, oh shit. Not exactly what a lot of people wanted to see. Keselowski moves up to 2nd and starts challenging Kyle for the lead. Elliott is right there as well. Then we get our 6th pure lead change on lap 265 when Brad Keselowski takes the lead. And despite the fact that Kyle Busch has much older tires than Keselowski, he's actually keeping it close with Kes for the race lead. So tires didn't really seem to matter all that much in this race, which is kind of weird considering that it's a short track, and typically at short tracks tires mean a lot, but not at Bristol apparently, and not last night, because Kyle Busch's tires were much older than Kes's. Truex gets by Larson for the 5th position. And we have Elliott, Jones, and Truex battling for the 3rd position, basically like 3 cars under a blanket. Stenhouse scrapes the wall in turns 1 and 2. Yeah. Larson goes by Elliott for 4th on lap 344. Kyle Busch starts challenging Keselowski for the lead, and this is when shit really started getting crazy. Kyle Busch and Keselowski traded the lead 5 times in 6 laps. So we went from 6 pure lead changes up to 11. When they swapped the lead back and forth 5 freaking times. And I'm just like, holy crap. And this is the point where I actually started falling behind in my notes, because I write my notes down. And this is the point where I started falling behind because shit started happening all over the place at this point. Because during the time that Busch and Kes were trading the lead back and forth, Truex loses the right front tire in turns 3 and 4 and has to make an emergency stop. And then the 5th caution comes out on lap 362 when Alex Bowman loses a left front tire and hits the turn 1 wall. Joey Logano and William Byron pile into the back of him. It's just like, geez, slow down, people. I'm trying to catch up here. So we're now up to 11 pure lead changes at this point. And it's just like, damn. Certainly the most that we've had in a non-restrictor plate race so far this year, as far as pure lead changes go. And we're not done yet. So everyone comes in for service, obviously, and Kyle Busch wins the race off pit road once again. So he leads on the restart. Kyle Larson has a tire rub on the left front, and what actually happened there was he came onto pit road, and I believe it was one of Eric Jones' pit crew was holding a tire out like this, and Kyle Larson just barely, and I mean barely, scraped that tire. But with the clearances as tight as they are, you know, in these wheel wells, it crinkled the fender just enough for it to have a tire rub. And it's just like, wow. Kyle Larson passes Kyle Busch, Kyle Larson. Eric Jones passes Kyle Busch for the lead, which would have been our 12th pure lead change, but unfortunately the 6th and final caution comes out on lap 372. Excuse me, 1 second. I forget which car it was, but someone came across Ryan Blaney's right front tire with the left rear fender. And these fenders are like knives nowadays with these tires. Came across his right front, cut the right front down immediately, and going into turn 1, he basically just went straight and collected Ricky Stenhouse, Michael McDowell, and David Reagan. Reagan ends up spinning down the track and collects Jimmy Johnson, which tears a chunk out of the right side sheet metal of the 48 car and basically exposes the blue styrofoam underneath. But Ricky Stenhouse involved in another wreck once again, but for the 2nd straight week, it's an accident not of his doing. I mean, I don't think highly of Stenhouse, and I think he's trash as a driver, but the last 2 weeks, you know, the wrecks he's been involved in have not been his fault. He had a tire go down at Michigan last week, I believe, and this week someone else loses a tire, which happened to be Ryan Blaney, and he was just in the wrong place at the wrong time. So not much Stenhouse can do on that. Blaney was able to recover, but Stenhouse, McDowell, and Reagan, not so much. And you could actually add Jimmy Johnson to that as well. And then the camera panned out and showed that the blood moon was out tonight, and it's kind of like, ooh, spooky. That always seems to happen though. So, Eric Jones leads on the restart, and this is a guy who desperately needs to win. But then DiBenedetto gets up to second by Kyle Busch on the restart, and I'm just like, are you serious right now? And then the OMFG cannon started rearing up for a massive explosion when Matt DiBenedetto passes Eric Jones for the race lead on lap 396. And at this point, I'm like, oh my God. This was our 12th pure lead change of the day, and it's like, you know, when you consider, you know, the fact that the news that DiBenedetto was going to be out of the 95 car broke this week. If he turns around and wins this race, it's going to be like, holy shit. You know, and here's the other thing that also kind of came into play, which didn't really set in until a little bit later, you know, in the final 100 laps. And that's the fact that if DiBenedetto had won this race, he would have been locked into the playoff. And I didn't realize that until a little bit later. I was like, oh my God. He could literally knock someone else out of the playoff that's ahead of him, which admittedly, I mean, just proves how trash the system is. I mean, the playoff system is fucking garbage, you know, and I'm going to get into that more here in a little bit. But that aside, seeing Matt DiBenedetto lead this race and have a shot to win it, you know, considering everything he had, you know, basically had to go through this week with learning that he wasn't going to be back behind the wheel of that 95 car, seeing him lead this race was pretty damn cool. And I was like, I am praying to God that he wins this race, because he is giving that 95 car the run of a lifetime. And then right after DiBenedetto takes the lead, Eric Jones actually gets loose in turn 2 and smacks the turn 2 wall. And Chase Elliott, who was right behind him at the time, had to take evasive action. And Jones basically has to come down pit road for repairs, and that pretty much takes him out of the running. And that's a tough break because, you know, he's needed a good run, you know, and this happens. So that kind of sucks. So at this point, it's like, yeah, Matty D is leading this race. You know, the OMFG cannon is waiting to erupt. Chase Elliott and Brad Keselowski start battling hard for the second position with 83 laps to go. But a guy who was starting to creep himself into the picture at this point was a guy by the name of Denny Hamlin. After 2 loose wheels, he has managed to recover and is now up into the top 5 and gets into the battle with Elliott and Keselowski. And Hamlin gets by Keselowski. I think it was either Keselowski or Elliott. I think it was Keselowski for the second position with 46 laps to go. And he definitely had a good car. It was just a matter of if he could catch Matt DiBenedetto and pass him for the win. And it is at this point that I am going to segue into my next segment of this review. Buckle up. It's time for the dumbass of the week. Alright, so we're coming down to the final 40 laps of this race. And who else but Ryan Newman decides to basically drive like a fucking toolbox. Now, I'm just going to go ahead and let this be known right now. There are quite a few people that are defending Newman for his actions. You know, and I do see where they're coming from in some aspects, but if you're expecting me to defend what Newman did, you're going to be disappointed. So, fair warning. And I'm going to basically go into a lot of explanation as to why I feel the way I feel. So, fair warning, my opinion is going to be extremely brutal, but it's no frills, no bullshit. It's just how I honestly feel. So, fair warning. So, what happens is, here's the situation. So, Ryan Newman is, I believe, running in the 11th position at this time, which is where he finished. And he is on the tail end of the lead lap. Matt DiBenedetto comes up to try and lap him. And in typical Ryan Newman fashion, he races him pretty damn hard. Now, the people who were coming to Newman's defense were basically saying, well, you know, he's trying to stay on the lead lap, and if he somehow catches a caution, then he's going to have an opportunity to move up through the field and gain a few more spots in the points and keep his spot in the playoff. I can see where they're coming from, but it's also another reason why I can't stand this playoff format. It's because, I mean, this is a byproduct of this format. We have guys in the lower half of the rankings having this false belief that if they somehow barely squeak into the playoff, they'll have a chance to win the championship. When the fact of the matter is they are not winning jack fucking shit. Okay? How many teams, how many drivers in the bottom half of the playoff rankings have won the championship in this format? I think Joey Logano may have been the lowest, maybe, but I think he was still in the top half of the field last year. And even though he only had the one win going into the playoff, I mean, he was still super damn consistent. I mean, I think he had like 26 top 10 finishes, which is still pretty damn impressive. You know, whereas you have some of these guys like Ryan Newman who get a top 10 finish here and there. But, I mean, let's be honest here, people. If you're 15th in points, you really shouldn't be considered a contender for the championship to begin with. And the fact that almost half of the full-time teams get into the playoff and are considered championship contenders is a fucking joke. And another thing is, if you don't want to be put into that position where you are in danger of falling out of the playoff, then here's a novel concept. Start performing better. You know, because the last couple of years, Newman has either been on the outside looking in or just barely scraping it in. And it's just like, yeah, he's making it in, but what is he doing with it? I mean, let's be honest here. Ryan Newman, for the most part, in the last 4 or 5 years, has been largely irrelevant. I mean, we talk about him here and there, but more often than not, it's him basically racing like he's got his head up his ass. You know, and there's some people like, well, you know, people are getting mad at him for racing Matt DiBenedetto hard, but, you know, he's done it before at other races. Yeah, and what do you think I've done? I've criticized him for it every single fucking time. And there's some people saying, well, lap cars are just a part of racing, get over it. Well, guess what? Okay. I know that lap cars are part of racing, but there's a difference between racing someone hard, staying on and trying to stay on the lead lap, and then there's also trying to, let me rephrase this. it's one thing to race the leader hard to stay on the lead lap. It's a whole nother discussion when you try to put him in the fucking fence. And that's basically what Ryan Newman did to Matt DiBenedetto last night. You know, like I said, racing him to stay on the lead lap, I mean, on the one hand, I can understand it, but the way Newman went about it was fucking wrong. And what did Newman do? He basically ran right into DiBenedetto's left front fender. You know, and Matt Weaver also said, you know, Newman was also did that because, you know, if Matt DiBenedetto wins, then that's one fewer spot that's available in the playoff. Well, you know what? Maybe if Newman performed better, then he wouldn't be putting himself in that precarious position anyways. And besides, he would have been the same amount of points above the cut line that he is now. I mean, I don't like this format, period, but that's just the rules that we run under now. But you say, well, he's going for, you know, he's trying to, you know, fight his way into the playoff, keep his spot in the playoff, so he could try to go for a championship. Let's be real, people. How many of you actually think that Ryan Newman is winning this championship? He's going to be lucky to get out of the first fucking round. He has not shown to be consistent enough whatsoever to even be considered a championship contender. He's not even going to get a sniff of it, okay? What makes you think he has a snowball's chance in hell of lifting the Monster Energy Cup at the end of the season? I mean, you really think he's going to stand a chance against the Joe Gibbs juggernaut, the Penske Racing juggernaut? You honestly think he has a chance to win the championship against those guys, considering how well they've been running all fucking year long? Give me a fucking break, okay? And that's another thing that I just can't stand about this playoff format. It's given some of these mid-tier teams the false hope that they believe that if they get into the playoff, they have a chance to win the championship. It's bullshit, okay? It's false hope. These teams have next to no chance at sniffing that fucking championship. And Newman, I mean, you know that you pissed off a large amount of fans when your last name is number 3 on the US trends on Twitter. No joke. And I'm showing it on the screen right here. I'm trying to figure out how this works. Right here. Newman, his last name, trending at number 3 on the US trends on Twitter. That should say something. And the other thing is, I really don't give a shit what the reason is. If a back marker affects the outcome of a race negatively, it is guaranteed to piss me off. It is one of the biggest pet peeves that I have in motorsports, is when a slow ass car affects the outcome of a race, interferes with the battle for the race win. It pisses me off to no end, because a guy who had no business at the front of the field to begin with basically fucked up someone else's chance at winning a race. And not just winning a race, his first race. And despite what some people think, we don't get to see first time winners all that often. I mean, yeah, we had Alex Bowman and Justin Haley this year, but by and large, we don't get first time winners all that often. A little bit of a surprising fact, through the 71-year history of NASCAR, Less than 200 drivers have won a single race at NASCAR's highest level. You believe that? I didn't know that. Not until I watched Slap Shoes' 9 different winners video. That shocked the hell out of me. I mean, through 70 years of the Cup Series, you're telling me that less than 200 people have won a race at the highest level of NASCAR? I mean, that shocked the hell out of me. It's like, damn, I didn't realize it was that few number. I mean, I honestly expected more than that, considering how many races they run in the 70 plus year history of NASCAR. But yeah, only less than 200 people. So I think that also played a role in the fact that there's a lot of anger directed at Ryan Newman right now, and rightfully so in my opinion. And I think a lot of the frustration also stems from the fact that we basically went back to the status quo with Hamlin winning this race. And on top of that, considering how much emotion Matty D had at the end of this race, you know, and the heartbreak that a lot of fans were feeling in him not winning, I think that also fed into the anger directed at Newman even more. I think which led to his last name being number 3 on trending on the US trend on Twitter. And yeah, this is Newman's reputation, but it's a reputation like this that, I mean, it's no wonder he's not a well-liked driver in the fan base. He drives like a fucking toolbox. And he ended up basically costing Matt DiBenedetto the win because he crinkled in DiBenedetto's left front fender. And DiBenedetto said afterwards, and even though he says he doesn't blame Newman for it, which, you know, he certainly got some class, I'll certainly say that. But he said that the left front fender being caved in made that car go tight. And it just makes you wonder, if he doesn't sustain that damage, I honestly think he holds Denny Hamlin off. Because yes, while Hamlin had a fast car, if DiBenedetto's car didn't go tight, and he was holding Hamlin at bay for quite a long while despite the damage. So it kind of makes you wonder, would he have been able to hold him off if he didn't have that damage? And I think he would have. He had the car, he has the talent. I think he would have held Denny Hamlin at bay if it weren't for Ryan Newman's interference. So, I mean, I said it best on Twitter, fuck Ryan Newman. And I know this might rub some people the wrong way, but I hope Newman gets knocked out of the playoff. I hope he doesn't make it in. I hope he never wins another race again. And even if he does make the playoff, I hope he's knocked out in the first round. Because as far as I'm concerned, he doesn't deserve shit. I know that's going to rub some people the wrong way, but I really don't care. This is just how I feel, and if you don't like it, I'm not asking you to stay and watch this video, so that's just how I feel. So Ryan Newman, without a doubt, is the dumbass of the week this week, by far. And like I said a couple weeks ago, there are a lot of contenders for the award this week. So fuck Ryan Newman. Well, now that I've got that off my chest, let's finish this review up. So after that, Matty D has damage to the left front fender, and Hamlin starts chasing him down for the race lead. And Hamlin really starts putting pressure on Matt DiBenedetto for the lead with 20 laps to go, and amongst a bunch of lap cars. Then with about a dozen laps to go, he finally makes the move to the inside, gets alongside DiBenedetto, and takes the lead from him on lap number 490 for our 13th pure lead change of the day. DiBenedetto tries his hardest to fight back and get back to Denny Hamlin, but Hamlin holds him off and wins the Bass Pro Shops NRA night race at Bristol. My first thought was, what a buzzkill. But I'm going to also say this right now. Is it true that I wanted Matt DiBenedetto to win other than Denny Hamlin? Abso-freaking-lutely. And I will be the first one to admit that I can't stand Denny Hamlin at times. But do I blame him for trying to win the race? No, absolutely not. Because yes, there are times when Denny Hamlin can be an annoying ass, but Hamlin didn't really do anything wrong. I mean, his job is to go out there and win races. I mean, he has FedEx as a sponsor, so you know, he has to go out there and perform and try to win races and go for a championship. And to be fair to Hamlin, I mean, he had to fight back from damage in the first caution of the day and 2 loose wheels. So he had to come back and earn this win as well. You know, and apparently there was some anger directed at Hamlin as well, which, I'll be honest, as much as I dislike Hamlin at times, I don't think that's really fair to him. You know, especially considering the fact that after he got out of the car, the first thing he said was, you know, I'm sorry to Matt DiBenedetto and to Levine. You know, he knows how much a victory would have meant to them, but like he said, and like I just said, you know, his job is to go out and win races. He has to give 110%. And the classiest thing that DiBenedetto did was he went to victory lane and congratulated Denny Hamlin on, let's be honest, it was one hell of a race. All things considered, yes, Matt DiBenedetto winning was a huge bummer. It really was. And watching that post-race interview they did with him and seeing him struggle to hold back his emotions from just pouring out. I mean, I felt so terrible for the guy. Because he's losing his ride at the end of the year, and he put on the performance of a lifetime. I mean, that run last night was awesome. He took that 95 car on a ride that I don't know if it will ever see again. I mean, Christopher Bell might be able to do it next year, but I mean, this was Matty D's best chance to get that first career win, and it was stolen from him, not by Denny Hamlin, but by Ryan Newman. So feel so gutted for DiBenedetto, but Denny Hamlin did nothing wrong. As much as I don't like Hamlin at times, like I said, he's just doing his job. So if you want to be mad at someone, be mad at Newman for driving like a tool. So 23 lead changes in this race, 13 of them pure. Like, holy freaking crap, dude. Yeah, despite all of the annoyances, this was still an awesome race. But thanks, Newman, for being a buzzkill. So, good job, you fucking nipplehead. Let's go ahead and take a look at the race results and the updated point standings real quick before I give my final rating on this race. Alright, so here are your race results for the Bass Pro Shops NRA night race at Bristol. Of course, Denny Hamlin winning from the pole. And of course, Matt DiBenedetto with that excellent performance. Oh, what a shame. Really should have been talking about DiBenedetto in victory lane. That would have been, without a doubt, one of the coolest moments of the year. but it was still a career best finish for him. And I mean, honestly, he still has one more good shot to win a race this year. And what race would that be? The Charlotte Road Course. Have you seen this guy's performance on the road courses this year? Like I said earlier, he had a top 10 finish at Sonoma. I believe it was like a 6th place finish. And then he finished 4th at Watkins Glen, legitimately. So this guy knows how to get it done on the road courses as well. So I would not be the least bit surprised if he's a contender for the win at the Charlotte Road Course, which is coming up not too long from now. So I would look for Matt DiBenedetto to be a contender there as well. Brad Keselowski comes home in the 3rd position. Kyle Busch, despite all his problems, being a lap down at one point, comes home 4th. Chase Elliott in 5th. Kyle Larson. Clint Boyer was involved in a spin, but comes back to finish 7th. He was the last car on the lead lap. Only 7 cars on the lead lap this race. This race really felt like an old school Bristol race, where not many cars were finishing on the lead lap. In fact, only the top 13 cars, I think, finished at least 1 lap down. The rest of the field was 2 or more laps down. So this felt like an old school Bristol race. Daniel Suarez comes home to finish 8th. Kurt Busch in 9th. And Ryan Blaney, despite the fact that he had that tire go down, comes home with a top 10 finish. So nice recovery by Blaney. And that's your top 10 results. Give me 1 second. Alright. Point standings, which should be showing up on your screen right now. So, here are the playoff standings with 2 regular season races remaining. The Cup Series is off next week. And then on Labor Day weekend, we got the Southern 500 and then the Brickyard 400 to end the regular season. So the 9 drivers who are locked in: Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, Martin Truex Jr. with 4 wins apiece. Of course, Kyle Busch is going for the regular season title, and with Logano having his troubles tonight, that certainly ups Kyle Busch's chances to win the regular season championship and get 15 valuable playoff points. But as per the usual, it is Penske versus Gibbs at the front of the field. You have Kyle Busch, Denny Hamlin, and Martin Truex Jr. with 4 victories apiece, which means that, yes, Joe Gibbs Racing has won half of the races so far this year. And then you have Brad Keselowski and Joey Logano 4th and 5th. Again, Logano, Penske versus Gibbs. Then you have Kevin Harvick in 6th, despite the fact that he had transmission troubles last night. I mean, it's not really going to affect him. I mean, he's already locked into the playoff. Chase Elliott with 2 wins. And you have Kurt Busch, who won at Kentucky, and Alex Bowman, who won at Chicagoland. And then you get into the guys that are not locked into the playoff, but have a good shot at it based on points. Ryan Blaney, Kyle Larson, William Byron, Eric Almirola, and Eric Jones, they could conceivably lock themselves into the playoff after next week, because the maximum number of points you can gain or lose is 60. So if those drivers manage to have basically a 61 point gap, or 60 to 61 point gap on the cutoff line, then they're essentially locked into the playoff. Which means that Ryan Newman, Daniel Suarez, Clint Boyer, Jimmy Johnson, Paul Menard, and Chris Buescher, they're going to be basically fighting for the final 2 spots. And despite the fact that Clint Boyer recovered for a 7th place finish, he didn't get a whole lot of stage points. So Ryan Newman is currently 14 points above the cut line, and Daniel Suarez, who a couple weeks ago was pretty much on the outside looking in and was looking like, well, he might need a win to get in, all of a sudden he's the 16th and final driver, but only by 2 points over his teammate, no less, Clint Boyer. Jimmy is on the verge of not making the playoff for the first time in his career since the chase was established in 2004. And then you have Menard and Buescher, who basically need a miracle win to get in. So that is how the standings look. 2/3 of the way through the season. We only have 12 races remaining in 2019. As for my final rating for the Bass Pro Shops NRA night race, despite my irritations with the lap cars, and in particular Ryan Newman, and despite the fact that it was a gut-wrenching feeling seeing that win ripped out of DiBenedetto's hands, I mean, this race is certainly going to have us talking for quite some time, and there were a lot of storylines coming into this race, and the race itself was absolutely awesome despite all the annoyances. I mean, 13 pure lead changes in this race for a short track race. That's insane. I mean, we typically see that number at, super speedways, and in particular, Daytona and Talladega, and yet 13 pure lead changes, which I think is the third most this year, and the most of the non-restrictor plate tracks. So, and all the emotion that came out of this race, some good, some bad, but this was still an awesome race, and in my opinion, it was the best race of the year. So, my final rating for this race, I mean, honestly, if DiBenedetto would have won, this race probably would have gotten a 10. But despite him not winning, and despite, all the things that I said, this race is still going to get a 9.5 out of 10. Despite all the nitpicky things, this was definitely the best race of the year so far. We still got 4 races to go in IndyCar, well, 3 technically, since the next race I'm going to be reviewing here in a second is the ABC Supply 500 at Pocono. But we still got 12 races remaining in the season, but I mean, it's going to be a hard task for any of them races to, live up to the excitement that this race was. So, I mean, 23 lead changes overall, 13 of them pure. Battle for the win at the end. I mean, it sucks that DiBenedetto didn't win, but at the same time, it was an awesome run by him, and I will be surprised if he's not a full-time driver next year. And Denny Hamlin said it best: if you're a car owner, if you don't pick up Matt DiBenedetto, you're an idiot. That's basically what he said in Victory Lane, and I agree. So hopefully he'll be able to land a ride next year. More than likely, he's going to be in the 38 car, because like I said earlier, I don't think there's any other rides available at the moment, at least any high tier rides at the moment. So I think he's going to be landing at Front Row Motorsports, at least for 2020. But I think we're going to see Jimmy Johnson retire from the Cup Series next year. And I wouldn't be the least bit surprised if DiBenedetto slots himself right into that 48 car. At least that's the hope. But we'll have to wait and see. But DiBenedetto, for sure, he won the hearts of a lot of fans last night. I mean, just to give you an example, from what I heard, when they showed his face up on the big screen when they were doing the post-race interview, the roof came off the fucking place. Like, the crowd just roared its approval. It's like, holy crap, dude. I mean, if that doesn't tell you, how much these people wanted to see him take that win, especially with everything that, he had to go through earlier this week, learning that he was not going to be back behind the wheel of that 95 car. I mean, a lot of us wanted to see him get that win. You know, it would have meant so much. And, you know, to see him, you know, have that kind of emotion, you know, after the race, and see how gutted he was and not getting the win. I think he won over a lot of people's, you know, opinion after last night. I mean, the guy deserves to, you know, being a top tier ride. I mean, he took that 95 car and almost put it in victory lane. He was literally 2 handfuls of laps away from victory lane. So he deserves to have a top tier ride, and I will be shocked if he doesn't have one next year. Oh, Lord. Man, what a video that we've had so far. And we're not even done yet. This has been one long ass review, and we still got the ABC Supply 500 to do. So let's go ahead and get into that and get it over with and call it a day. So next review, the ABC Supply 500. Let's do it. Alright, so since we're about already an hour and 40 minutes into this video, let's go ahead and get this done and over with, because let's be honest here, nothing really happened in the IndyCar race, so that's why I didn't really talk about it all that much. But let's get this done and over with. 2019 ABC Supply 500 at Pocono, and it sucked ass. I only had 2 pages of notes, so let's go ahead and just zoom right through this. Qualifying was canceled due to the rain, so the starting lineup was set based on owner points. So that means that Joseph Newgarden starts from the pole. And just like last year, we get a caution on the very first lap. Very similar incident. We had a big crash in the turn. Takuma Sato went 3 wide with Alexander Rossi and Ryan Newman, and basically tried to cut down in front of them, tried to shoot a gap, and wasn't clear, like, at all, and took Rossi and Ryan Newman into the inside wall. All 3 cars swept back up the track. Hinchcliffe put it into the wall, trying to avoid them, and Sato's car clips Felix Rosenquist's car, which flips Sato's car over and onto RHR's car, and Rosenquist nearly went into the catch fence, but thankfully did not go into the catch fence. Did damage it a little bit though, and Rosenquist had to go to the hospital for further evaluation, but he was fine, as was everybody else. Yeah, Takuma Sato was definitely a contender for Dumbass of the Week with this incident. I mean, there's just no excuse for that. And there were a lot of people that were calling for him to be suspended for a race or 2, or maybe even the rest of the year. But of course, IndyCar decides not to do that, and I got a bone to pick with IndyCar officialdom here in a minute. The red flag was issued on lap 4 to repair the catch fence, and it was big championship implications for Rossi, who was obviously involved in the wreck. Him, Hinchcliffe, and Ryan Newman decided to try to get their cars repaired even though there was a red flag, which meant that they were going to get a penalty for working on their car under the red flag. And IndyCar decides to slap them with 10 lap penalties. The fuck? Are you kidding me? Like, they're not going to be contending, you know, for the race win or even a good position. Why the fuck are you penalizing them 10 laps? And it pissed me off even more because from what I heard, Sato is only going to be assessed a fine for the lap 1 incident. I don't know what the fuck is going on with IndyCar the last couple of years, but it's going downhill. I mean, from the racing to the officiating and some of the executive decisions, IndyCar is quickly becoming a fucking joke. You know, it was just a few short years ago that I was saying that IndyCar had the best racing in the world. And at one time, just a few short years ago, it did. But nowadays, last couple of years, that's just not the case anymore. And it is so frustrating to, see that the racing has basically become a joke. Officiating fucking sucks. I mean, IndyCar, it just really hasn't been enjoyable to watch really all that often. This year in particular has been fucking garbage. And there's only been, I think, a couple of races this year in the IndyCar series that have actually been good, actually been enjoyable. But a large majority of the races this year have been fucking trash. Whereas you look at NASCAR and, there's some times where I might disagree with some things that, they call and shit, but at least the racing over there has taken a dramatic turn for the better. And there's only been a few races in the Cup Series that have been turds this year. But IndyCar, it's just not been the case. So, I don't know what exactly they need to do to turn things around, but they need to do something because IndyCar's just not that enjoyable to me anymore. Will Power has to pit for fresh tires once they get the race back going again. He has to pit for fresh tires after a tire puncture running through the debris. Simon Pagenaud leads on the restart after a red flag period of about 45 minutes or so. Scott Dixon takes second from Newgarden on the restart. Zach Beach kicks off green flag stops on lap 30. Then Pagenaud pits from the lead on lap 38. Then we have our second caution on lap 41 when Spencer Pigot smacks the wall in turn 1 after getting well, at first he thought he got too high and into the marbles, but it turns out he thinks that something broke on the car. Let's see here. On this caution, Will Power actually managed to make it to pit road, so he basically made up a lot of track position and was basically right behind his teammate Pagenaud on the restart. Got a great run on him on the restart on the outside, but couldn't quite make the pass. But he definitely makes the pass going down into turn 1, and we have our first pure lead change on lap 48. But Pagenaud does the same move to him a couple laps later on lap 51 for our second pure lead change. Bourdais gets by Ericsson for 5th as Marcus Ericsson begins to fall through the field a bit. We have mass pit stops starting on lap 70. Pagenaud gets pinched by Hinchcliffe, who is back on the track after getting his car repaired. And Power takes advantage and takes the lead once again. And that's our third pure lead change on lap 71. And then we learn that weather would become a factor later in this race, which it certainly did. And of course that always seems to be the case, late summer days in Pocono. Third caution came out on lap 74 when Colton Herta loses the car in the tunnel turn and pounds the wall, so his day was done. And this time around, Will Power gets caught out by the caution, having not pitted yet, so he had to pit for 4 tires and fuel, obviously. But it was pretty obvious that Power had one hell of a race car, and he would prove it here in the later stages of this race. Rain starting to get closer as the race nears halfway. Not quite there yet. Scott Dixon leads on the restart. He managed to cycle up to the lead. Ed Carpenter up to 4th on the restart after getting a great run. Will Power starts rushing back towards the front up to 4th as he gets by Carpenter. Santino Ferrucci, who restarted in 2nd. He was hounding Dixon for the lead for quite some time. And then they finally made it to lap 101 and made the race official. So even if weather does stop the race, at least it's done and dusted. Newgarden kicks off green flag stops on lap 105. Scott Dixon cycles back with the lead on lap 112. However, Will Power, who pitted 5 laps later than everybody else, cycles back around with the 2nd position and fresher tires. And he basically ran Dixon down really quickly and just blew by him for the race lead. Our 4th and final pure lead change of the day on lap 115. Power basically ran away from the field, and it was basically a good thing he did because the 4th and final caution of the day came out on lap 26, not for rain, but for lightning. So, yeah, Justin Haley has entered the chat. So we have red flag number 2 for lightning in the area. And as we know, the lightning policy for a sporting event is if there is lightning within 7 miles of the racetrack or a sporting venue, then they have to wait at least 30 minutes after the last lightning strike in order to continue the event. But lightning just continued to come down. They even had some shots in the background of constant lightning, and heavy rain was fast approaching, and it was going to come over the racetrack no matter what. And considering the fact that they had red flagged the race at around 5:30 or so, and considering how big Pocono is, by the time they got the racetrack dry, it'd be already dark. So there was really nothing they could really do about the weather this time around. So IndyCar calls it at 128 laps, which gives Will Power his first victory of the season and extends his streak to 13 straight years, winning at least one race. So good job for him to extend basically a career-long winning streak. This race sucked. I mean, a lot of this race was just single file, boring as shit. I mean, really the only thing of note to talk about from this race was the lap 1 incident, and that's about it. I mean, yeah, we had some lead changes, but I mean, there was nothing of note to talk about in this race. And of course, rain ending it early, which honestly felt more like a blessing than anything else, because this race was just fucking garbage. And then there have been talks that they might not return to Pocono next year and instead replace it with Richmond. I don't know if that's confirmed or not. They've not released the schedule yet, and that's something they're going to do probably in September, before the end of the year, or the end of the season rather. But right now it's not looking likely for Pocono to return to the schedule. So before I give my final rating, let's take a look at the updated point standings. 1 second. Well, first, before we get to the updated point standings, here are the race results. 1 second while my computer loads it up here. And you'll note on the screen, I'm showing it on the screen, it says current running order. They showed this under the red flag while the race was red flagged for lightning, and this ended up being the finishing order. So Will Power gets his first win of the year, Scott Dixon second. Scott Dixon's really come on strong in the last 4 races with 3 runner-ups and a win, which basically puts him right back in the championship hunt. Simon Pagenaud with his 4th podium of the season. Santino Ferrucci, the highest finishing rookie in the race. Joseph Newgarden with a top 5 run, continuing to try to get his 2nd championship. Ed Carpenter in 6th. Sebastian Bourdais 7th. Tony Kanaan with a very respectable 8th place finish, considering how bad his season has been. Graham Rahal in 9th, and Charlie Kimball notches a top 10 finish. So good job by him and his limited runs this season. So to the point standings, and it says points as they run because again, this was during the red flag. But with 3 races remaining in the NTT IndyCar Series season in the race for the Astor Cup, Joseph Newgarden continues to lead. He more than doubles his advantage over Alexander Rossi. Simon Pagenaud closes the gap a little bit to 40 points. Scott Dixon also closes the gap, but he's still 52 points back, which is not exactly the easiest gap to close. But of course, with Laguna Seca being double points, as of right now, these top 4 drivers, Newgarden, Rossi, Pagenaud, and Dixon, they are the only drivers that are in contention for the championship. Will Power, despite winning the race, only makes up a few points, and he's now 128 points back. And then everybody else is pretty much out of the championship picture. Ryan Hunter-Reay in 6th, Graham Rahal 7th, Takuma Sato 8th, Felix Rosenqvist in 9th, and Sebastian Bourdais moves back up into the top 10. As for my final rating for the ABC Supply 500, this race fucking sucked. I give it a 2 out of 10. And that's about the best I'm going to give it. Well, I'm fucking done reviewing for today. Whew. Fucking 2-hour video, man. Just about 2 hours. Easily the longest video I've personally ever made for YouTube. 2 hours long. The Cup Series is off next week, and that leaves the NTT IndyCar Series at Gateway. So that will be the only race I will be reviewing next week. So IndyCar has a chance to get on stage and be the center of the spotlight. And hopefully Gateway next week will be a lot better than the trash we saw today. So that'll do it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next week for Gateway. Till then, see you later. Well, that is all for today's video. Thank you very much for watching. Be sure to rate, comment, favorite, like, and subscribe to my channels here on YouTube.com and over on BitChute.com. If you would like to sponsor my channel, go to my channel page at subscribestar.com. Thank you very much for watching, and until next time, this is the PackerMan signing out. Have a good one.